All right. So chapter 2, so what happened in chapter 1? Anybody remember what happened in chapter 1 of Daniel?
You eat lots of vegetables.
He declined. So Daniel and his 3 friends, also known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, not their Hebrew names, but their Babylonian names, they're taken captive in 605 BC and taken back to Babylon. And they go through you remember what happens to them when they get to Babylon? They're enrolled in what? They're enrolled in basically a course of study for 3 years to learn Babylonian language, culture, history, and as well as apparently a lot of the Babylonian religious beliefs, including things like dream interpretation. And at the end of the 3-year period, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are the outstanding students in the class. And as a result, they get added to the class of the wise men. Now, how many students there were and whatever their assignments the other students have, we don't know. But Daniel and his 3 friends, because of their excellence, get assigned basically to the group who are counselors to the king. And are able to bring guidance from the gods and from the fates and from the stars to the king. So in 605, Nebuchadnezzar, remember, and I'm just going to call him Neb from here on in the slides. I got tired of typing Nebuchadnezzar on these slides. So remember in 605, Crown Prince Nebuchadnezzar, his father Nabonidus was the king. Nabonidus had conquered Babylon, taken it up back from the Assyrians, and then Nabonidus, in a coalition with the Medes, who are basically today's Kurds, conquered Assyria and drove the Assyrian army out of Nineveh, their capital. In 605, Nebuchadnezzar, together with the Medes, defeated the combined armies of Assyria and Egypt at Carchemish and pursued the fleeing Egyptians all the way to the border of Egypt, where he lost the battle. But he still defeated the Egyptians. And on the way back from Egypt, he stops in Jerusalem and he removes the Egyptian puppet king and replaces him with a Babylonian puppet king. And he also takes several thousand young men from Israel back as captives to Babylon. And that's how Daniel and his friends get there. So when we turn to chapter 2, we're going to shift into a unit of the book that is almost a standalone unit. And it is a unit that covers prophecy about the Gentile nations during the times of the Gentiles. And the times of the Gentiles are the period of human history in which God gives dominion over all the earth to a series of Gentile nations. Now, this is a major change in the Old Testament plan for the world. And that beginning in Genesis 12, the plan was for all the world to be under the dominion of the descendants of Abram, who later became Abraham, and then Israel. And then when the nation is established as a nation at Sinai under Moses, the plan is for God's rule to be reestablished over the whole world through Abraham's descendants who had become a nation at Sinai. But when you read the Mosaic covenant, there is a penalty clause for not keeping the covenant. And that penalty clause is to be denationed and dispersed to among all the nations of the world. So that has happened, and it's begun to happen in 605 BC, and it is going to happen finally in 597 BC when Jerusalem is destroyed. So what we have revealed for the first time in Scripture in Daniel chapter 2 is that this dominion of the world now passes to a series of Gentile kingdoms. And so that's where we are. This is a really stylized presentation. Kind of, it's amazing when you look back and you look at the literary structure of these books of Scripture. It's just brilliant. And so chapters 2 and 7 both can have visions of 4 symbols of the Gentile nations. Chapters 3 and 6, we have episodes of persecution of believers living under Gentile domination, persecution and deliverance. And then in chapters 4 and 5, we're going to see revelations to 2 Gentile kings. So this is that chiastic structure that Dave talked about last week. And it just occurs again and again in the book of Daniel. So what we're going to see chronologically is chapter 7 comes before chapter 6 chronologically, but it occurs in Daniel's structure before chapter 7 because it fits the structure. All right. And now, Daniel becomes captive in 605. He goes through a 3-year period of training in 602, and then the author is going to call 602 the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. But you think it should be the 4th year, but he calls it the 2nd year. All right. And as Dave talked about this last week, this is because the Babylonians count the first year as the ascension year. It's year 0. Okay. And so, and partial years aren't counted as years. So when we get to 605, Daniel and his friends are just finishing their 3 years, but they've been living under Babylonian control for 3 years. But it's Nebuchadnezzar's 2nd year because his first year was year 0. And his 2nd year hadn't ended yet, even though he's in the 4th year. So, and when you think it's confusing, but it also is direct evidence of the authenticity of the dating here. So if you look at the book of Daniel on Wikipedia is going to tell you that the book of Daniel was written in about 160 BC instead of 600 BC. And that's because unbelieving scholars don't accept the possibility of prophecy. And since some of the events in Daniel aren't fulfilled until the 1st century BC, it can't have been written in the 6th century BC. That's just accepted as an obvious fact, right?
Obviously, some of the events haven't happened yet, so the book still hasn't been
That's
written.
right. And some of them are still being fulfilled down to this very day, which creates a lot of problems for him, actually. It creates a lot of problems for him. And one of the problems is in this chapter. And Daniel describes the Roman Empire, which seems obvious if you're open to prophecy being real. And yet they have to try to figure out how he could describe the Roman Empire, having written before the rise of the Roman Empire. So even though they reject it and late date it, and they can't date it later than that because it's in the Septuagint, which was translated in 200 BC. So kind of locks them into not being able to they have to come up with another way to dismiss the prophecies about Rome. Now, so I'll just start here. In the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, which was nearing the beginning of his 4th year of his reign, and the end of the 3rd year of their training, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. And his spirit was troubled and his sleep left him. Then the king gave orders to call in the magicians, the conjurers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. To see these 4 classes of counselors. So they came in and stood before the king. The king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to understand the dream. And Terry, when I read that, I think about what you told us when we were talking about Joseph interpreting the Pharaoh's dream. How some of your patients will share a dream and it's just routine, but then they'll share a dream and they just can't let it go until they talk about it and get it interpreted.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
And I remember what you said is a lot of times those are kind of life-changing dreams.
Yes, they are.
They work through something and there's a big change in your relationship with them and in their ability to handle their life.
Yeah, because it's something that I think dreams tell you things that you need to know it for living. And it's like that unconscious mind that's always there running underneath the surface is always picking up information, and it needs to tell you things. And dreams are the best way to tell you. And yeah, I mean, and when people hear from when you can get those symbols, get those correct, and only the person knows when it's correct, and they'll just have this aha moment, and it's like, that's exactly it.
That's exactly it.
That's exactly it. And because their own mind knows, yeah, that's what I was trying to tell you.
I don't know, those of you that were here when we went through Genesis, when we were talking about Joseph interpreting Pharaoh's dream about the 7 cows and the 7 ears of corn. And I've always been confused by that passage because the Egyptians had dream interpretation books. And so they should have been able to look up and figure out an interpretation of Pharaoh's dream. So why didn't they accept it? Well, this is the explanation. They knew it wasn't correct. The Pharaoh knew it wasn't correct. And then he has this over-the-top response to Joseph when Joseph gives him the correct interpretation and elevates him to prime minister. We're going to see the same thing in chapter 2. Yeah, great.
Say one thing that's really cool, the Lord's using dreams with the Muslims. I'll share with you just a recent one, but a friend of mine, he had been sharing with the son. And so the mother, she came to him, his name's Jeff, and she said, Jeff, I had a dream where Jesus was smiling down on you from heaven, and I could tell he was blessing you. You were chanting something. And so Jeff told her, he said, well, I was probably quoting from the scriptures. He said, how would you like to look at what the New Testament, the Injil, has to say? And so she did. So it's neat how the Lord's using that even today.
It's part of their culture. It's part of the culture. So, and if we look at the life of Nebuchadnezzar, remember, he was crowned prince when he defeated the Egyptians and pushed them back to Egypt and collected it. But when he gets back to Babylon, his father Nabonidus has died. He is then crowned as king. So he takes over this vast empire, 1,000 miles from end to end, over 1,000 miles, like 1,500 miles from end to end. Newly minted empire. And as soon as he gets back to Babylon, the Philistines in the Gaza Strip today start to revolt. So he immediately has to get his army back together and go back 1,000 miles to take down the Philistine city of Ascalon. So now he's back home, and I can't imagine why he can't sleep. I can't imagine. I mean, he is living in a high stress environment. He's a young man. His father has died.
Do we know how old?
He's probably 30-ish. Yeah, he's really young. Really young. I remember when 30 sounded old. Yeah, Michael.
This might more have to do with the chapter from the last time, but I was thinking about it. It appears, well, Daniel for sure cooperated with the training.
Yeah. Mastered it.
he learned much that God used from his training from the sorcerers of Babylon. I'm kind of thinking along the application for us is we can go to public school and to the universities and learn many good things, but we just need to be discerning and say, oh, this part is garbage.
Yeah.
Throw it out, but much of it is actually good.
Yeah.
Would you agree that that's kind of the way he probably looked at it?
I think so. He was able to separate the wheat from the chaff.
Right.
Yeah. And we'll talk more about the Babylonian dream books here in a minute. They had large collections of dreams and what subsequently happened to the person after they had the dream. And first chapter particularly notes that Daniel was particularly adept at interpreting dreams, which tells me he was a master of the dream books. Okay. Now notice he had dreams, but then he asked them to he tells them he's anxious about the dream. So whether this is a recurring dream or whether he had a series of disturbing dreams and then he remembers this last one is just not clear. And notice there's four groups here: the magicians, and these are probably people who could tell the future from omens. For example, they would examine the internal organs of a sacrificial animal, and if they found an abnormality, then they would be able to relate that abnormality to events that happened in the past when that abnormality had been found. Okay. So in a sense, they're not making up. They kind of have a scientific approach about it. I remember back when King so-and-so sacrificed a goat and there was a growth on the liver and then he got destroyed when he went into battle against the Medes. Oh, you better not go into battle against the Medes. So they have a collection of these observations. The conjurers, remember the witch of Endor in Samuel, where Saul wanted to talk to Samuel even though he was dead because he was going into battle against the Philistines, and so he goes to the witch, and the spirit of Samuel comes up and says to Saul, "You're going to die, and all your sons are going to die with you." And it happens the next day. Okay, so they apparently practice this kind of communication with the dead, who it was believed had additional information. Now, Paul tells us that these people are communicating with demons. All right. They have the sorcerers who can cast spells. It's a sympathetic magic. You might think of a voodoo doll kind of thing. And then there were the Chaldeans and the Babylonians. So Chaldea, Babylon is within Chaldea, the culture of the Chaldean nation. They were masters of astronomy, of astronomical observations. And this is where your 12 signs of the zodiac come from. And so they knew which season of the year it was and how long it was till the next season from observing the zodiac and the position of the planets, which of course move through the heavens faster because they're in motion. And so the planets, literally planet means a wanderer. So they wander through the heavens. Right? So they had interpretations of future events based upon the location of the planets relative to the signs of the zodiac. And so if you have this planet here and this planet here and this planet here, then you shouldn't do this because when that was a situation before and so did it, it went wrong. Or when so-and-so did this, it went great. So they're able to, and their astronomical charts were amazingly accurate. Now, accurate data into a flawed interpretive algorithm produces nonsense, but they had spent centuries developing this scheme. Now, so you have these four groups. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic. O king, live forever. Tell the dream to your servants, and we will declare the interpretation. The king replied to the Chaldeans, the command from me is firm. I'm not going to compromise on this. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a rubbish heap. So I'm going to kill you and leave your family homeless. Seems kind of over the top, doesn't it? But if you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and a reward and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation. How would you like that demand, Terry? Tell me what I dreamed and then tell me what it means. All right.
It almost sounds like he doesn't trust them.
I think that's the case. I think he does not trust them.
A lot of commenters have said that because he was young and these wise men were from his father's reign, that he probably thought they were trying to pull one on him, and he, he's the young whippersnapper, we'll tell him. And he was kind of showing his backbone.
He's a young bull here who's he's conquered the world. I mean, he has conquered the world. He has defeated the Assyrians and the Egyptians and chased them all the way back to the border of Egypt. So, notice Daniel says the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, and at that point the text shifts to Aramaic. And this chapter through the end of 7 are in Aramaic, not in Hebrew. Okay. And that they're actually in a form of Aramaic that is known today as Imperial Aramaic. And so this was like English is today. It's the language that if you want to talk to somebody from another country in, so it's amazed me when I started going to international scientific conferences. So if you go to Thailand, and in Thailand you go to where they speak Thai, and you go to dinner with a German and a Frenchman and a Japanese, what language does everybody speak? English. Yeah. The Russians aren't going to learn Japanese, they're going to learn English. The Japanese aren't going to learn Russian, they're going to learn English. The Thais aren't going to learn Russian, they're going to learn English. The Italians aren't going to learn Thai, they're going to learn English. Everybody speaks English. Imperial Aramaic is the language of government, business, and diplomacy, just like English is today, just like French was in the last century, the 19th century. Now, the Babylonians had these dream books where they had accumulated thousands of dreams and what had subsequently happened after the person had the dream. So they had thousands of these examples. So what the Chaldeans would do here is you would get the dream and then you would find the closest matches to the dream in previously recorded dreams, and then look up what had happened and then try to synthesize that into an interpretation of what the future is going to hold. So that's what they're expecting. They're expected to be told the dream, then they're going to go back to their books, and they don't have a Google search, right? And there's thousands of these dreams. So what do they have to depend upon? Their memory, their memorization of the dreams. So I think when we see in chapter 1 that Daniel is a master of dream interpretation, he can remember all of these thousands of dreams and what was meant, what happened, what the interpretation is. So he has memorized all this stuff. Robert?
Yeah, I was gonna say, it seems like, all these four groups, they were opposed.
Yeah.
In other words, they're speaking from things that they have seen. And
Yes.
Nebuchadnezzar saw that, and he said, I'm gonna make sure. The difference is Daniel isn't really gonna be speaking so much about the host. He's gonna actually get the sovereign God come into him and give him the wisdom.
He's going to have revelation from God.
That's exactly.
That's right. Just like what Bruce was talking about this morning. So, So he throws in this new twist. You have to tell me the dream first, and if you don't, I'll kill you. And you know, I admit this cruel and unusual punishment, like you being torn limb from limb, is actually pretty characteristic of this age. And now the Babylonians weren't as bad about this as the Assyrians or the Persians were. Like they dreamed up really grotesque ways of murdering people, executing people. But this is not hyperbole. He means it. Now, it's not possible to tell from the text. So just like Bruce was talking about this morning with the prophetic word made more sure, exactly what that phrase means. There's three kind of equally probable interpretations. It's not possible here to be certain from this particular verse whether or not he remembered the dream or not. The phrase, the command for me is firm. What he literally says is, it has gone out from me. And so some people think that he'd forgotten the dream. I don't think that's the case, because when we see further on, he says, if you can't tell me the dream, I'm not going to believe the interpretation. I don't have any way to know that you're not just making up the interpretation. So I think he remembered it, but he's just saying, I'm not changing my mind on this. Don't argue with me on it. I've made a firm decision. You have to tell me the dream first before I'll listen to the interpretation. So I think kind of like what you were saying, Neil, he's skeptical of these guys. I wonder how many times they have told him something like, don't pursue the cow, don't attack Carchemish, or don't pursue the Egyptians. And he's saying, I don't care what you say. I can see what the reality is before my eyes. I know what to do, and I'm going to do it.
No, and jumping ahead a little bit, they basically say, we can't tell you the thing. Comes from the God.
That's right. That's
so
right.
They basically admitted, we've lied to you in the past.
So I think probably it's the old graybeards that are there in the room with him, not the 19-year-old Jewish whippersnappers, up and coming young geniuses, but a bunch of old geezers. And he doesn't have respect for them.
Never trust anybody with their.
Yeah.
Well, if you threaten their lives, you're gonna get bad information.
Yeah. It's not a good plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
I was gonna say, I can't remember where I read it, but it said that Nebuchadnezzar executed anyone who wished.
Oh, yeah.
Can you imagine?
You're
The guy's just
That
like,
power.
you, chopping block.
Well, I mean, when I see this, both the arbitrariness of the command and the cruel and unusual punishment, it just makes you thankful for our Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We are so fortunate, among the few people in the history of the world, to live under a rule of law. It's something to continually be grateful for and to defend. The counselors say, wait, what? The Chaldeans answered a second time, let the king tell the dream to his servants and we'll declare the interpretation. The king replied, I know for certain you're bargaining for time, inasmuch as you have seen that the command from me is firm. I'm not changing my mind. That if you do not make the dream known to me, there's only one decree for you, off with your limbs. For you have agreed together to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the situation is changed. Therefore, tell me the dream that I may know that you can declare to me its interpretation. Now, it seems pretty clear there that he remembers the dream. He's going to use that as a measuring stick to see whether he can trust the interpretation. Yeah, Greg.
I kind of interpreted where he said, it has gone out from me. It wasn't the dream, it was the command.
It was the command. I think that's exactly right. I think that's exactly right. Now, when he talks about bargaining for time, he knows that if he tells them the dream, they're going to go back and then they're going to be searching through their old books, trying to find the closest dreams. All right. And they're not going to be anyone exactly like it. And so they're going to have to mesh 2 or 3 or 4. And he said he's not going to stand for it. He's done with them. I don't know if they've done this to him in the past or what, but okay. And then the counselors make a big mistake here. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there's not a man on earth who could declare the matter for the king, inasmuch as no great king or ruler has ever asked anything like this of his magicians, conjurers, or Chaldeans. But basically what they're saying is, if you were a great king or a great ruler, you would know that this is not the way it's done.
They must think they're dead already.
If they weren't, they are now. No great king would ask this of their counselors. Moreover, the thing which the king demands is difficult, and there's no one else who could declare it to the king except gods, and they're not here. They don't come down and answer the demands of men. All right. So basically, they tell him that you're a young, inexperienced ruler, and you're asking something that everyone knows is impossible. And if you knew better, if you were older and wiser, you wouldn't even be asking of it. To which the king basically says, okay, kill them all. Because of this, the king became indignant and very furious and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon, the group to which Daniel and his 3 friends had been assigned. So I'm done with these guys, kill them all. I'm going to start all over again with a new batch of counselors, off with their arms and legs. And so the decree went out for the wise men to be slain, and they looked for Daniel and his friends to kill them. So out of the frying pan into the fire, right?
So the decree is instantaneous.
Yeah, kill them all right now.
Well, if they're killed right now, then nobody can run out and tell the other people they're coming to get you.
Well, and there's a select group that are there with the king.
Yeah.
Evidently
Daniel.
Daniel and those guys,
Yeah.
they were not included.
Yeah, they didn't bring the young whippersnappers with them. So yeah.
You know who these guys are, don't you? Today's modern day bureaucracy. And what president hasn't wanted to say, kill them all?
Start all over again with a fresh batch of bureaucrat. Yeah, that's right.
President. The populace that wants to throw a grenade in, blow it up.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that there were the old guard, they were the ones that he had picked himself, that had gone through the training program. He just threw them in. You know, it's not like everybody was part of the old guard with the.
Yeah.
I mean, it almost seems like a knee-jerk reaction.
I think so too. He became indignant and he was furious and he just said, kill them all. Kill all the wise men. Yeah.
Guilt by association.
Then Daniel replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch, the captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone forth to slay the wise men. Daniel said to Arioch, for what reason is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch informed Daniel about the matter, the fact that the wise men had insulted the king. So Daniel went in and requested of the king that he would be given time in order that he might declare the interpretation to the king. Now, apparently this request is made through an intermediary. So apparently the message is sent to the king. There are men among the wise men who are willing to try to respond to your demand.
I don't understand where you got the intermediary.
Because when Arioch brings Daniel to the king, he says, I have found someone who can interpret the dream. Okay, so I don't think Daniel himself went to the king, because otherwise then Arioch wouldn't have been able to take credit for having
It's
discovered it.
also pretty prohibited to just
Yeah.
walk into the king.
Yeah, so I don't think that this young man had access to the king, but I think that Arioch said to the king, let's wait a while. There are some among the wise men who claim that they are willing to try to interpret, to determine what your dream is. Yeah.
But still, I got a little bogged down in this part because this area, it doesn't actually say that he told them they must say what the dream is. But then as I read on, I realized that as Daniel interprets it, he is revealing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think here where it says, then Arioch informed Daniel about the matter. I think that's,
He probably recounted what happened.
yeah, I think that Arioch is, he,
Aware that he would have to rebuild.
yeah, that they got into this trouble. They got into trouble with the king. And why is the king wanting to kill all the wise men? And why is he wanting to do it right away? Well, he demanded they tell him the dream first, and they insulted him in their response. So rather than saying, let us go back and seek from the gods, they just said, nobody can do this. And you wouldn't even be asking if you weren't 30 years old.
Well, in the part where Daniel responded with discretion
Yes.
means that I think Daniel, after hearing the episode,
Yeah.
was very careful to say in a very discreet manner, whatever a tactful manner.
A tactful manner.
Respectful.
What
Respectful.
can we possibly have, time to discern this?
Yeah. And he gets the request granted. So when they respond to Nebuchadnezzar, we're willing to try. Can you give us a few days? Nebuchadnezzar, maybe he's cooled off a little by this time and is kind of regretting.
Had a little time to think about it.
Yeah, go ahead, Terry.
Well, put yourself in the place of Arioch. I mean, he was the king's bodyguard. He wasn't, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't think he killed people all the time.
Yeah, not an executioner.
No.
Yeah.
He was
He
sent
probably
to.
knew all these people and he
Yeah.
didn't
He
want.
probably did. He probably knew a lot of them and their families.
He's probably looking for a way out.
That's a good observation. Yeah. Then Daniel went to his house and informed Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And so Daniel uses here the Hebrew names of his three friends rather than the Babylonian names, which he's going to use in the next chapter, so that they might request compassion from the God of heaven. And that phrase God of heaven is very important in this section. Okay. And it literally is God of the heavens. The heavens are the abodes of the gods. So this is the God of the gods. Whatever it is that anybody thinks is a God, there is still a God over them, the God of the heavens. And that's the way Daniel is going to present his God to Nebuchadnezzar as the God over all the gods. Right? So that they might request compassion from the God of heavens concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men. I didn't say he asked for mercy. He asked for mercy for himself and his friends. So, and it makes me think of the tax gatherer in Luke. God be merciful to me, the sinner. Not God, I don't deserve this, but God, your compassion and your mercy, deal with me through that. And
It's interesting that Nebuchadnezzar's wise men, I think, reacted in panic.
yeah,
They lose their head, insulted the king. The king reacted in anger. And how did Daniel react?
prudently.
I have someone greater. I have faith in something greater that I have confidence in him. Whereas the others were all panicking.
They were looking, yeah, I think that's a good observation.
Well, and trusting that God was gonna tell him. I mean, God chose not to tell him. Like Shadrach, Meshach.
Like this I said. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So as best as I can understand, the difference between a dream and a vision is that you're conscious during the vision, but you're unconscious during the dream. Okay. So he doesn't have it revealed to him in a dream, but in a vision. And the book of Revelation is a vision, for example, and Daniel's going to have other visions, waking dreams during which you're conscious. And notice that the author keeps us in suspense and doesn't tell us the dream at this point. So he's going to make sure we read through to the end of the chapter. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven, the God of the heavens, okay, the God of gods. And so he writes a psalm here. This is very similar to the Psalms in the book of Psalms. Let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. It is he who changes times and the epochs and removes kings and establishes kings. You'll see that fits the dream. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. In his light, we see light, right? It is he who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. It's in his scriptures that we find truth, not in the wisdom of men. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and power. Daniel thanks God for giving him power, this knowledge that he has about the dream and its interpretation through the vision has given him power within the Babylonian government. Even now you have made known to me what we requested of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. So I think it's very significant here that Daniel and his friends stop and thank God for answering the prayer, rather than forgetting about the fact that God has been gracious to them and given them their answer. It's an easy thing to do, isn't it? Pray while your back is against the wall, and as soon as God gives you a way out, then you forget to be thankful about it. So it's a good thing to remember. Therefore, Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon, and went and spoke to him as follows: do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king's presence. Notice this time he says, I want to speak to him personally. So I think before, Arioch got a message to the king and got the executions delayed. This time, Daniel wants to go into the king's presence. And I'll declare the matter. Then Arioch hurriedly brought Daniel into the king's presence and spoke to him as follows. And notice Arioch takes credit for the solution to the problem. I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can make the interpretation known to the king. The king said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, his Babylonian name, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? So he's not backing down on the man that you got to tell me the dream first. And Daniel answered the king and said, and first thing he's going to do, he says, I'm going to tell you what you asked, but it's not because I'm smarter than everybody else. It's not because I'm a wiser wise man than all the other wise men, right? As for the mystery about which the king has inquired, neither wise men, conjurers, musicians, nor diviners are able to declare it. This is beyond human ability. Okay. But there is a God of the heavens. So there is a God over the gods of the heavens. There's a God of the heavens. There's a God over the abode of the gods who reveals mystery, and he has made known to the king. So what Daniel says is, I have received the knowledge of your dream and its interpretation because God wants you to know the content and the meaning of the dream. So this is a revelation to you, Nebuchadnezzar, from the God of the heavens. Right? He has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the end of days. So this is almost a technical term for the time leading up to the establishment of God's rule over all the earth. So this dream goes not just from Nebuchadnezzar's battles with the Egyptians and the Philistines, but down through the end of human rule over the earth. He has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the end of days. The term is the end of days, and we translated it literally. This was your dream and your visions in your mind while on your bed. As for you, O king, while on your bed, your thoughts turn to what would take place in the future, and he who reveals mysteries has made known to you what will take place. So when Nebuchadnezzar was going to bed, he had troubling thoughts. He had anxiety. When he fell asleep, it was bleeding over into his dreams. And God sent him a dream to tell him what the future was going to be. And he brought it to him through, he brought the interpretation of it to him through Daniel. As for me, the mystery has not been revealed to me for any wisdom residing in me any more than any other living man. I'm not smarter or wiser than your other wise men. But God picked me out to give you the interpretation of the dream. But for the purpose of making the interpretation known to the king. The reason I can give you the interpretation is because the God of the heavens wanted you to know what's going to come in the future, what's going to happen in the future, that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. So this is actually going to help you in sorting through the decisions you've got to make. And he's going to tell him that he is going to be the most successful king in history. That's what he tells him. All right. So I think that God was putting Nebuchadnezzar on a path that he wouldn't have gone down apart from this dream. Now, what would have happened in Nebuchadnezzar's rule? What would have happened in the history of the world if Nebuchadnezzar didn't have this dream? We'll never know. I guess when we get to heaven, maybe we can ask Nebuchadnezzar. You can decide that after we look at chapters 3 and 4. All right. You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single, I'm getting short of time here, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. There was a single great statue. That statue, which was large and extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance induced fear. All right. We use the word awesome too casually, and it's lost its original meaning. So the head of the statue was of fine gold, breast and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, feet of iron mixed with clay. You continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands and struck the statue on the feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So it's a statue, not an idol. And it's immense, and it strikes fear in him. And Carl Jung talked about numinous awe. It's the feeling of otherworldliness or being in the presence of something from beyond our own realm. And I think of being alone in the dark in an unknown part of the world, and you're hearing sounds, and there's a thrill of fear that runs through your whole body. Okay. And Nebuchadnezzar felt that numinous awe in the presence of this glittering metallic statue. So this might be something like what Nebuchadnezzar saw. So notice the thighs and the abdomen are bronze, and there's the skirt going. So this is a Babylonian warrior. Okay, head of fine gold, chest and arms of silver, abdomen and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and then feet of iron mixed with clay. So immense height, but it's real close to him, so that when he suddenly finds himself in front of this statue, it induces fear in him. Exceedingly bright, so like it's being illuminated by a powerful light, and the light is reflecting off of these different polished metals. Now, most of the commentators make the observation that it's top heavy and it has a weak foundation, so it seems like it's prone to topple over. Okay. And statues with these multiple metals have been found in the ruins of Babylon. So whether they were probably inspired by Nebuchadnezzar's dream, okay, as we'll see in the next chapter here. And then this stone is cut out, it strikes the image on the feet, and the feet of iron and clay are crushed by the stone, but then the whole statue seems to be crushed into powder. And then there's like a summer breeze at the threshing floor that carries away the chaff, and all the power remnants of this immense, awesome, awe-inspiring statue just dissipate into the wind, and they're gone, and there's nothing left. And then the stone that crushed the feet grows to become a great mountain, and from horizon to horizon, the mountain spreads from horizon to horizon. Okay, so the old earth is filled with, so it dwarfs the immense statue that's just been crushed. This was the dream. Now we will tell its interpretation. You, O king, are the king of kings, to whom the God of the heavens, the God of the gods, has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, are the beasts of the field, are the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand and has caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold. So in the garden, God said to Adam and Eve, rule over the earth. The plan was for that rule over the earth to pass through the descendants of Abraham. But because the Jewish nation violated the terms of the covenant, that sovereignty over the earth has been passed to King Nebuchadnezzar. Right. So God, if you read through the first 9 chapters of Genesis, what you see is before the flood, earth became filled with violence. So as the text says, every man's thought was continually evil. His every thought was evil. In a lawless, chaotic society, without a constitution, without a police force, the whole earth degenerated into anarchy. Okay, just like the French Revolution, okay, which the founding fathers of the US feared was the only alternative to a monarchy. So they knew they were taking a risk when they created a republic. You know, and if you read the Federalist Papers, they just admit right up front that every historical republic that had ever existed had fallen apart into anarchy. So God chose Nebuchadnezzar to be the one to prevent anarchy across the face of the earth. Okay. He's the head of gold. After you will arise another kingdom inferior to you, then a third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth. So this dominion over all the nations of the earth is given first to Nebuchadnezzar, then to a second kingdom, which we'll see later is the Medo-Persian Empire, and then a third kingdom, the Bronze Kingdom, which is the kingdom of Alexander the Great. And we'll see more of that when we get to chapter 6 or chapter 7. When we'll see a vision of 4 beasts that represent these 4 kingdoms. Then there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things. So like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. So these remnants of these first 3 empires are going to be conquered by the fourth empire and then divided up into pieces. Okay, which is exactly what the Romans did. After they conquered the kingdoms that were left after Alexander the Great, they divided them up into administrative districts and put local rulers over each one. And that's why you end up with Pontius Pilate over Judah, and you end up with Herod Antipas over Galilee. All right, so it's right here in Daniel chapter 2. Okay. In that you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it will be a divided kingdom, but it will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. As the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw iron mixed with common clay, they will combine with one another in the seed of men. So in their human manifestation, there will be blending between the kingdoms. but they will not adhere to one another. There's still going to be differences between, still going to be friction between them, even as iron does not combine with pottery. So in the days of the king, in the days when the kingdoms of men come to an end, this fourth iron kingdom is present in a collection of independent kingdoms. Okay? And what we're going to find beginning in chapter 7, and it'll be reiterated in especially chapter 11, though there's a lot of it in chapter 7, and then this is really emphasized in Revelation. The Antichrist will come to be the leader of this collection of kingdoms, confederation of kingdoms. So the Antichrist kingdom is a kingdom of kingdoms. Okay. All right. Okay. So we're gonna, as we go on through Daniel, we're gonna revisit this fourth kingdom, and we're gonna see that it is present at the time of the return of Christ. Now, if we look historically, and okay, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. So this is the Messianic kingdom. All right. And that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all of these 10 kingdoms. So this kingdom of kingdoms, all of the sub-kingdoms are going to be brought to an end, but it will itself endure forever. So there is an end of history. There is an end of history coming. Okay. And as much as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands and that crushed the iron, the bronze, the silver, the clay, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future, so that he saw that this stone was cut. This is a sign that this dream came from the God of the heavens, the great God, the God over all the gods. Therefore, its interpretation is trustworthy. Interpretation didn't come from the dream books. Interpretation didn't come from past experiences of men cataloged in dusty parchment, but is a direct revelation from the God of the heavens. So you can trust the interpretation. You can make your decisions based on this revelation and be confident that this vision is true. And Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and did homage to Daniel and gave orders to present him an offering and fragrant incense. So, surely your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, since you have been able to reveal this mystery. So Daniel actually accepts worship from Nebuchadnezzar, but because he knows that the worship is being given to him as the representative of God. Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many gifts, made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, chief prefect over the wise men. So he replaced the old geezers with the young whippersnapper. And I'm sure that went over well. I'm sure that was well received among the old geezers, right? And I'm speaking as an old geezer. And Daniel made request to the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the administration of the province of Babylon. So they're going to be direct reports to him, and everybody else is going to report to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, while Daniel stayed at the king's court. All right, so similar to what happens with Joseph. All right. So I'm going to finish up in 3 minutes. Okay. God is in control of history. Who is king and who is not king is controlled by God. So when we look at the present world scene, we need to have the faith that Daniel and his friends had about the fact that God is in control. Okay. God is sovereign in our lives through his sovereignty in the outcome of elections, in the outcome of wars, in the outcome of trade battles. All right. Now this iron kingdom, which we'll figure out is Rome as we move on through the book, continues in its divided form down to the return of Christ and the establishment of the millennial kingdom. Okay. This is the form of the fourth kingdom that we are in today. The Western world, and especially the Western world as it's manifest in the United States, have dominated the world since the Middle Ages, since the Renaissance and the Reformation. And that domination economically, militarily, culturally, even linguistically continues right down to today. We are the heirs of the Iron Kingdom. And the purpose of that rule, God's given that dominion to a nation all the way down through human history in order to prevent the globe from just being consumed in chaos. Not because we're wiser, not because we're more righteous, but because God needs a policeman in order to keep the world from going back to the Genesis 6 chaos, where every man's thought were continually only evil. So in each age of man, there's been this dominant world power. The fourth kingdom, the Iron Kingdom, is the one that continues in its divided form right down to the end of days. What we will find as we move on through Daniel is the Antichrist gains control of this divided kingdom in the last days and uses it to try to exterminate the Jewish nation. And only by God's supernatural intervention is Israel preserved and passes into the kingdom of the Messiah as the nation through which God will rule the world. So now another thing that's important about this, besides putting our present situation into context, is that we have a pattern here for the literal fulfillment of prophecy. And the fact that prophecy is understandable. So this pattern that's established in Daniel, if we take this pattern to the book of Revelation, the book of Revelation is understandable. So understanding Daniel is a prerequisite to understanding the book of Revelation. Let me close for us. Father, we thank you for your word, and Lord, every time I look at prophecy in your word, I just remember what you said to the disciples in the upper room. You told them that because you're my friends, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do before I do it. And Father, thank you for calling us your friends, and thank you for telling us what you're going to do. Now, Lord, we just ask you that your Spirit would teach us, we might learn the right lessons from this prophecy. And Father, may we have confidence in you, because we know that you are the God of gods. You are the great God, the God of the heavens. And you've called us your friends, and you've sent your Son to die for us and to shed his blood so that you might adopt us into your family and call us your children and give us an inheritance. And we pray this in your Son's name. Amen. Y'all have a great week.
Hey, Jeff.